Okay, we are going to start the live Experts on Air session in 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, we're going to start the live Experts on Air session. Welcome. Okay, welcome everybody to this live Experts on Air session facilitated by the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank. It is a live expert session, which is part of the project management techniques for development projects, professionals, MOOC, massive open online course. Today, we have a nice team. We have in the background, we have Cherise Ruddock. Cherise is based in Jamaica. She's helping me out in the background with your live questions that you can post. We also have Fernanda, who is helping us with the technical details. And my name is Menno Valkenburg. I'm a project pilot and coach. I work mainly in the Caribbean. I live in Havana, Cuba, and right now I am in Suriname. So I'm presenting this live experts on air session from Suriname. This session today is going to cover the modules 9 of the course. 2 months ago, we had modules 1 to 5. This time we are covering module 6, risk management tool, module 7, communication management, module 8, human resource management, and module 9, project control tool. So we're taking your questions for those tools. We have received a number of questions that we're going to answer in the next hour, but you also have a chance to put in your live questions. Where you logged into this live session, you should be able to answer any live questions that you have, and Cherise will then put them up for us, and I will try to answer them as best as I can. Let's first look at some course statistics. Right now, we have more than 10,000 registered participants, 10,085. The median age of the learner is 32 years, and we have participants from 182 countries. We were just talking about that. That is quite amazing. We're only missing a few countries, and I'm actually curious to know which ones those are. However, in the top 10 countries, we see USA, India, Nigeria, Jamaica. So Cherise is definitely happy. Trinidad and Tobago, which is not too far from Suriname. Canada, United Kingdom, Guyana, which is a neighbor of Suriname. Brazil, which is also a neighbor to the south. And Indonesia. So welcome, everybody. Welcome to this live session. Let's dive right into the questions. We have a first question that came in, and that was related to risk management from Shirley Kelly. Thank you very much, Shirley, for your question. I like it a lot because it's a real practical question. Shirley is working on the risk factors. She identified 3 risk factors for a development project that she's working on. But I'm having difficulty quantifying them and developing contingency strategies for them. For example, apparently where she lives, electrical and internet outages are common in the Caribbean. These outages usually occur before or after working hours. The online training project I'm working on will occur before or after working hours. So exactly during those times when typically the outages happen. How do you quantify such risks? Do I review the outage history for each island over the past year? Site visits to the different islands may be impacted by hurricanes. Last year, we had some terrible hurricanes in the Caribbean. So that will typically also affect internet and electrical availability for the project. Is creating a printable version of each module, can that be a viable contingency plan? Great question, Shirley, and I can really relate to this. I was actually without electricity and internet for about when Hurricane Irma passed by over Cuba. So this is something that is happening, and the question is really how do you deal with that? So let's look first at. I always like to formulate risks as looking at the cause, the risk itself, and the consequence of the risk. So the cause is really the fact or condition that leads to the uncertainty, because risks are typically uncertainties that may or may not happen. The risk itself is a particular or uncertainty, and then the consequence is the possible result should the risk happen. Now, let's look at your example. So my understanding of the risk is that the cause is really these electrical and internet outages that are common in the Caribbean and that happen quite frequently. The risk is then that your live training events cannot take place. The consequence could be or is that the training and learning objectives are not achieved. So let's come to your question. I think it makes sense to try to quantify some of this information. So it would be great if you can analyze or identify when do these outages exactly happen. Is that around what times would that typically happen? And would you still be able to sort of schedule some of your live sessions during the times that the outages usually do not happen? So that could be a benefit of doing some quantitative analysis. As a risk mitigation or contingency strategy, rather than printing the training material, I guess what I would recommend is try to set up basically a similar training environment that we set up for this MOOC training. It's a training environment that's set up using Moodle. And basically, you can access it anytime, and you can download the material, the information, when the internet is working. So in that way, you don't really need to have a printed version. But if maybe the system is outaged or the internet is not working at a certain time, you can try it back a little bit later. So that's my response to your question. Thanks again for the question. I think it's a great question. Let's move to question number 2. Question number 2 came in from Jaime. It's related to communication management. And the question is about communication strategy. The question is it clear that the communication strategy shall satisfy mainly the interest of stakeholders? Such strategy may be extremely sophisticated in terms of channels, social media, websites, written reports, etc., frequency, content. This situation is often missed in the early planning stage of the project, where the most important stakeholders are quite motivated. Are there any tips to introduce this communication strategy as main part of project management? Very good question, Jaime. And I really like your question, because communication and stakeholders is really critical to look at right from the start. So if we look at the project management body of knowledge, the PMBOK guide, based on which also the PM4R guide is built, the PMBOK outlines a number of processes for stakeholders and communication management. In fact, 2 of the 10 knowledge areas are related to that. So proactive project managers really want to start these processes already during the initiation of the project. You already want to start identifying who are your key stakeholders. You already want to think about how I'm going to engage and communicate with these stakeholders. And then during planning, you want to make sure that you develop your communication plan and further work on your communication strategy. And then obviously you want to execute in a timely manner the communication strategy and the communication plan that you develop. And at the same time, engage the various identified stakeholders. So project management is really a continuous improvement process. And you can also ensure that by doing some good monitoring and control to identify opportunities, to update the communications matrix, to update your communication modes, methods, and types. So I hope that answers your question, Jaime. Let's go to question number 3. Question number 3 is an anonymous question, but we also take anonymous questions, so that's okay. Of course, we like to have people mention their name so that I can also relate to that. By the way, if you would like to put in your live questions, you can do that now. Cherise is monitoring the live questions section, so if you have any questions that come up, feel free to put them down in the text box below, and then I'll pick them up after we cover the questions that came in preparation for this session. So question number 3 is also linked, or we felt it was linked to communication management, and the question is, what factors lead to conflicts in multicultural project teams, also with stakeholders? I really like this question. I work a lot in different cultures and with multicultural project teams, so it is something that I experience in daily life. What you typically see is that conflicts in projects, not in any project basically, but definitely also in multicultural project teams, arise when there is poor communications. Typically, a conflict is a result of not good communication, of not maybe managing the expectations correctly, not communicated information correctly. So the management of communications, updating your stakeholder matrix, engaging stakeholders, make sure you communicate with all the key people involved, should really occur continuously during project execution. And that will really help you to minimize conflicts. On the other hand, some other factors related to other conflicts may be manifested based on political, economical, environmental factors, and those really differ between projects. It really depends on the context of your project where being implemented, and also within countries. I mean, in different countries, there are different factors that contribute to these conflicts. So I hope that answers your question. Let's move to question number 4. Question number 4 came in from Sean Briscoe. It received 2 votes from other people in the course, so that's also great to hear. It's actually linked in a combination to human resource management and risk management. The question starts off with the RACI, the responsibility, accountability to be consulted and informed technique that is also part of Module 8. The question is, the RACI is an effective tool to communicate within the project, internal environment and the project task environment, which includes functional and line managers and team members. What escalation strategies does the IDB recommend for escalating issues, particularly in high-risk projects? So, Sean, yeah, this really depends on the organizational type you're in, but typically you would have functional line managers, you would have your project team, and the question is really around escalation strategies. So let's look at it from an IDB perspective. Within the IDB, risk management is really considered very important and is practiced throughout project execution. So once a risk is identified, once a risk shows up, the risk management processes are implemented. So you would analyze your risk, you would discuss potential risk responses and see what needs to be done with it. So for risks that then require escalation, the project team leaders, the IDB project team leaders, often outline various mechanisms for either addressing the risks themselves, because they have possibilities to address that particular risks, or if that doesn't work, elevate it to the sector manager or country representative, or maybe asking the local authorities within ministries and agencies in which the project is being implemented to address the risk. So that is question 4. Let's now move to question 5. Question number 5 came in from Heidi Vincent. It received 10 votes. I think this question was actually the question that received the most votes this time. The question is, we're actually now moving to Module 9, Project Control. There are a number of questions related to project control. Obviously, that is a very interesting topic, and I'm glad to hear that a lot of you looked into it and had questions about it. If you have any live questions now as we speak, because we are currently live, you can put your live questions down below. Cherise will look at that, and we will pick up the live questions after we've covered the questions that came in before. So question number 5 from Heidi is about the project control tool. The question is, in relation to earned value methodology, please confirm the proper names and acronyms for the project formulae in English, since these seem to have been lost in the translation of the course from Spanish to English. And specifically, she is referring to estimate at cost, EAC, which has the formula BAC divided by CPI, and estimate to completion, ETC, TT minus TC and SPI. I'm very glad you asked this question, Heidi, because these formulas and acronyms, and they sometimes get lost. So what I did on the next slide is I put down the formulas of the ones that you are asking your question about, which is estimate at complete, EAC, and estimate to complete. Those are also 2 formulas that you can find in the PMBOK guide on page 267. You can find these formulas. EAC, estimate at completion, is the expected total cost of completing all work expressed as actual cost to date plus the estimate to complete. So that is the official definition according to the PMBOK guide. So the expected total cost of completing all the work, and you look at, okay, what are the actual costs to date plus what is your estimate to complete. So in a way that makes sense, right? Now, if the CPI is expected to be the same, so if your cost performance index is expected to be the same for the remainder of the project, the EAC can then be calculated by taking the budget at completion and divide that by CPI. And I realize I now introduced another term that I haven't clarified here, but budget at completion is basically your latest version of your budget what you think your budget at completion is, divided by the CPI, which is your cost performance index. So that will give your estimate at completion. Now, the estimate to complete, ETC, is the expected cost to finish the remaining project work. And please note that this links to the cost. There are two elements to this, and a little bit later we'll talk about the time to complete, but now we're basically look at the estimate of complete. So the expected cost to finish the remaining work, assuming the work is proceeding on plan, the cost of completing the remaining authorized work can be calculated by using estimate to complete is estimate at complete, which is the top one, minus actual cost. And then the third element that I felt was important, because in the PM4R guide that you have been studying for this course, there is an estimated time to completion, which is actually one that is not showing up in the Pinball guide. So this is quite an interesting one. This is one that we introduced in this PM4R guide, because we felt that it was good not only to look at cost, but also at time. So what is the estimated time to complete? Now, in order to calculate that, you can use the formula. What was the total planned duration? So let's say 52 weeks, minus the elapsed to date, the time elapsed to date. Yeah, and you want to divide that by your schedule performance index, because your schedule performance index really gives an indication of how well you are progressing your project, whether you are delivering on time or whether you are behind schedule or ahead of schedule. So I hope this clarifies a little bit. I realize this is quite a complex topic, the whole project control, earned value management analysis. So feel free to ask your question and make sure to read material in the guide, because that is really helpful. Let's go to question number 6. Question number 6 came in from Suzanne Fonseca. Thank you, Suzanne, for your question. The question is, after using the project concluding the EAC, estimated complete, and the TTC, time to complete, I, project manager, decide which are the corrections needed. Yes, that's exactly what you want to do. You use these tools, these project control tools, to allow yourself to make corrections and adjustments. Now, the question is, how do I control if the correction I am indicating to the expected results? Very good question. Very good question. So let's look at this. What we really recommend for projects with a duration of 1 to 5 years is that you use and calculate the project tools on a monthly basis. So typically the development project, we look at a typical IDB funded project that would probably run about 5 years. So it makes sense to then calculate these formulas on a monthly basis. By doing this, it will allow you, the project manager, to verify whether the corrections you've implemented have the desired effect. Because after the new month, when your calculations come in and you see that it doesn't have the right effect, or it has a negative effect or a different effect, think of other corrections that you should apply, and you can then verify that the next month. So it's really important to get into sort of this habit of doing it on a monthly basis, because that really gives you the opportunity to then also verify your corrections and make adjustments when necessary. Okay, I hope that answers your question, Suzanne. Let's go to question number 7. Question number 7 came in from VJ. It received 4 votes. It's also related to the project control module. The question goes as follows. Let's say you have performed an earned value analysis a couple of months into your project, and you notice that you are both over budget and behind schedule. I imagine that if you, as the project manager, anticipate the intended results within the given time frame, and with the balance of funds you have, you will be forced to request an extension as well as additional funds. What are IDB policies with respect to an extension of time and cost for development projects? Is there a limit by which a project manager can request in terms of time or additional funds? Similarly, how does IDB treat with cases such as these? Okay, very good question, VJ. Now let's look. Kate, your project is a couple of months underway. Now, typically, if you look at an IDB funded project, as I mentioned earlier, you look at a project that probably lasts or will have a duration of about 5 years. So in the first couple of months of your project, you have typically only spent a fraction of your total project budget. If you notice then that you're over schedule, what is really important is that you first identify the root causes of these variations. Why are you behind schedule? Why are you going over budget? Now, assuming that your project is 3 to 5 years, you will then still have time to improve your performance and get back on budget and schedule. So that's also why it's important to really start doing this early on in the project and not wait until you're towards the end of the project, because then you basically have no opportunities to make adjustments or corrections. Now, in general, it's very difficult, if not extremely difficult, to get additional funding once an IDB funded project is approved. The approval of an IDB funded project is really a very complex matter, and you really want to make sure that you get the budget for what you want to try and do. However, it is, under certain conditions, possible to transfer funds between components of the same project or the same program. You need a good explanation, and you need to make sure you still achieve the expected outcomes, and impact. So there's some flexibility to transfer funds, but then requesting additional funds will be extremely difficult. Okay, I hope that answers your question, VJ. Let's go to question number 8. And let me remind you that you can still put in your live questions. So far, I don't think we have received questions yet. So feel free to put in your questions in the text box, and we will try to pick them up as we continue to answer the questions that were already sent in. Question number 8 also links to project control. It came in from Kish Mitchell. It received 3 votes. And the question is, need a bit more explanation on earned value. How can we operate businesses? It's a good question, Kish. Let me give you a little bit of background on the earned value methodology. It actually originated in the late 60s, early 70s of the past century, out of the Ministry of Defense in the United States. They were doing a lot of projects, and they wanted to be able to compare the performance of these very distinct projects with each other. So that is where it originated. So typically, earned value is used on somewhat larger projects in somewhat larger organizations. However, if you look at the essence of earned value management, it is scalable, and you can actually apply it to small projects, small businesses, small things. And in order to continue answering your question, I want to show an example which is also linked to question number 9. So if we look at question number 9, which came in from Sam, Sam asked the following question related to earned value management, and I think it also relates to, in a way, to the previous question. Can you talk about how to calculate earned value for a more qualitative project, where it is not as simple to calculate what your earned value is for, say, capacity building? Capacity building is typically something that is a little bit less tangible. So that's always, it's more difficult than when you're building a school or a building or something physical. And as Sam says, the tools shown seem to be with tangible results and products, but what about where all the outputs are intangible? So this is a very good question. So let's look at an example, and we have those a lot. So the example is, let's say you do capacity building, and you do that through a training program. And let's say you have a number of training workshops that you need to provide and execute and implement. So if you look at, let's assume that the planned number of workshops or number of programs was 7. So your project planned to execute 7 training workshops. at a cost of $70,000. So on average, that would be $10,000 per training program. Now, you are a number of months into your project and you do your earned value calculations. And you've noticed that your actual cost is 45,000. So you've spent 45,000 out of your 70,000 budget. And you have delivered 5 out of 7 training programs. That is where you are. So that means that your percentage complete is 5 divided by 7, which is 71%. Your earned value is then 50,000, because the way you can calculate earned value is by multiplying your planned value, 70,000, by your percentage complete, 71%. So if you multiply 7% times 70,000, you get to about 50,000. Your CPI, your cost performance index, is earned value divided by actual cost. So 50,000 divided by 45,000 is 1.1. And your SPI, earned value divided by planned value, is 50,000 divided by 70,000 is 0.7. So what you see here is good and bad news. The good news is that your CPI is larger than 1. And if it's larger than 1, that typically means it's good. So you're trending under budget on this item. The bad news, however, is that you're delivering slower than you expected. So you're behind schedule, because it indicates that you're behind schedule and moving slower. So I think this example is how you can use the earned value management technique for a little bit less tangible outputs, and let's say capacity building, training, those kind of things. At the same time, I think this maybe also shows how you can apply it in smaller organizations or smaller projects, but it would still depend on what your project is intended to achieve, and what products and results the project obviously is trying to achieve. So I hope this answers your question, Sam and Kish. Let's go to question number 9. Let's go to question number 9. And you are still, for those of you who are on the live session, feel free to put in your questions below. At the end of the session, we still should have some time to take some live questions. We're actually now going to a miscellaneous question. There were a number of questions that came in that we could not really link to any of the modules specifically. So this one is related to project costs. The question came in from Shirley Kelly. Thank you, Shirley, for your question. The question is, air travel and accommodation costs are highly variable. How best to mitigate these costs in a project? Is it ethical to request that the sponsor bear those costs and only charge for consultancy fees? This is a very good question. And actually, I think you would see this a lot in projects where you have capacity building, or where you maybe have a little bit less maybe tangible results, but also obviously in other projects. So those variable costs, those travel, accommodation costs, are usually very difficult to estimate. And what many project administrators do is they do some market research on these variable costs, so that they can sort of get an idea of what are these costs. And then you basically estimate higher charges or higher fees based on inflation rates or proposed exchange rates, depending on the trends, because that's another thing you probably need to take into account, especially if you're working in countries with high inflation, is how do you calculate those costs. So I think what you definitely want to do is do some market research and sort of understand, okay, how do these costs, where do they originate, and how do they develop over time? Applying such charges to the sponsor or the executor is really depending on the clauses that you have in the contract, in the grant or the loan agreement. So I think it really depends on the context and on the contract that you have, whether or not you can apply those charges to the sponsor. So I think when you design the project, when you design the contract, I think you want to make clear especially if you expect a lot of these costs coming in, you want to make sure that it's clear what you're going to do with that. But I would not just automatically apply them to the sponsor or the executing agency, because that may not always be possible. All right, I hope that answers your question. We have another miscellaneous question. Let's see, that is question number 2. It was again anonymous. We do not have any live questions, but if you want to put in your live questions, you can do that. We still have a little bit of time to take your questions, so feel free to do that. Question miscellaneous number 2 is, when you need to create a new quote in a different region than where you are located, how you suggest to integrate your labor costs according to the new location, keeping in mind that you cannot carry all your team to one location to the other. Very good question. This is, I think, especially applicable when you work in maybe smaller countries, maybe especially in the Caribbean. You have a lot of small islands here, and maybe you work in one island, you want to move to the other island, you want to do different work there. Let me try and answer that in this way. If you need to do a quote in a different region than where you were located, you definitely want to make sure you do some local market research. If it's a country or a region you've never worked in, you really want to do your market research, because you want to make sure your quote is really viable also for you. Another thing you could consider is that you try to team up maybe with a local supplier who has experience and information about the local market conditions. I think typically that would be a sort of a win-win situation. It would help you, since you work, you get that experience. It would help the local supplier, and I think at the end of the day, the client and the project is also benefiting from that. So I think there are a number of ways to address that, but it's definitely you want to spend some time on that, and you want to spend some research and analysis before finalizing your quote. So good question, good anonymous question. Okay, I think we're now going to the last question that we have received in preparation for this Experts on Air session. The last question is also anonymous, and it was actually a question that I found hard to answer, because it was not specific enough. So the question is, can you please explain how you obtain the answer for question 5 based on the reading? The way the course is set up is in different modules, and in each of the modules you have some reading, and in each of the modules there are some quizzes and tests with different questions. So it's okay to put a question like this. We also have some technical forums in the course but if you put a question like this, then please also be very clear and specific on which module, which question. Maybe repeat the question. That's also fine. You can just put the whole question, copy paste the question in the questions screen, and also the answers, and then we can really look at it and answer it during the next live session. So with that, I'm just doing a quick check with my colleagues to see if there are any live questions. If there are no live questions that came in, then I think we can slowly move to wrapping up this live session. I would like to thank you very much for those of you who put in questions. There were some great questions, some very nice questions. So it was a pleasure answering those. I would like to thank you all for joining. And we have a next session coming up, July 26th. So that is in a little bit over a month. We'll have a next session, so hope you can all join. Put your questions already in preparation. We'll do our best to answer all your questions. And it was great for all of you who participated. Thank you very much. Thank you, team. Thank you, Cherise, Fernanda. And we'll see you next month, July 26th, on the next session. Bye-bye.